Welcome to the Topic 2. Welcome to the Topic 2 Review and Answer Key. Topic 2 focuses on what is science and what is not science. If you want to review the information on this section of your practice test, please refer to daysheet number 2. To start off, we need to read the directions. The directions say to classify each of the following statements as what is science using an S or what is not science using an NS. So we're going to go through all 15 and simply state whether or not it's a part of science or it's not. So let's start with number 1. We need to ask ourselves, is science testable? This word testable means the same thing as experiment, meaning we can do an experiment. So we know we've already done a number of different experiments this year in biology class, so we know that absolutely science is testable. So I'm going to go ahead and put an S next to number 1. For number 2 is asking whether or not science is repeatable. And we've talked about this previously. A good experiment has a number of things that it has to meet in order to be considered valid or a good experiment. One of those things is that if I do the experiment and somebody else does the experiment, we should be able to get similar data every single time. And in fact, an experiment done just once actually doesn't receive any attention. The only experiments that receive attention are considered good or deemed valid are experiments that have been repeated many times. So obviously repeatable is absolutely something that is a part of science. For number 3, we're asking whether or not science is measurable. Well, if we think about laboratory, we know that we've used a ruler this year, we used beakers that have measurements along the side, and obviously we're taking a lot of data that requires measurement. So obviously science is definitely measurable. So we're going to say that science is measurable. Next thing is number 4. Number 4 is asking whether or not science is peer-reviewed. And this is one of the ones that tends to trick people on the test. Peer-reviewed means people who are the same as you are reviewing your work. So this means that scientists review other scientists' work. Now here's the thing, scientists double check one another. So if I as a scientist submit my experiment and a number of other scientists read over my experiment and they say, hey, this experiment isn't very good, obviously that science experiment's not going to carry any weight. So in order for science to be good or valid, lots of scientists have to review the work to say that it's actually science and that we follow the appropriate steps. So science is absolutely peer-reviewed. Next thing is number 5. Number 5 is asking whether or not science is certain. This idea of certainty means that it can't change. And if we think about science, we've talked about this particularly with textbooks and with journals. The reason why journals are the best thing to use for scientific research is because science changes all the time. And journals are up to date because they're released once a week, bi-weekly, monthly, or bi-monthly sometimes. And so the information that's housed in them is relatively up to date. That's not true for science textbooks. So the science textbooks that we have in our classroom are almost 10 years old. So obviously there's some information in those texts that are no longer considered correct because we've done new experimentation, there's new technology, new research that has cleared up misconceptions that we might have had in the past or given us access to brand new information. So science is not certain. Science changes all the time. So we're going to put an NS for number 5. For number 6 is asking whether or not science is absolute. Well, absolute and certain mean the same thing. So obviously science is not going to be absolute, so we're going to put an NS. Let's jump over to number 7. Number 7 is asking whether or not science is changeable. Well, we already looked at 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are the opposite of number 7. Obviously science is changeable. When we find new information, we change our understanding based on the data that's collected. So science is absolutely changeable. Number 8 is asking whether or not science is rigid. Rigid means inflexible. Another way of thinking about it is to say that it doesn't change. And we already know that science is changeable. We've already said that. So obviously science is not rigid. So we're going to put an NS. Number 9 is asking whether or not science is observable. Well, we already know that observation is the first step of the scientific method. And if that's the case, then obviously science is measurable and observable. So we're going to say that science is observable. Number 10 is asking whether or not science is modifiable. To modify something means to change it. So number 10 and number 7 mean the exact same thing, so science is modifiable. For number 11, it's asking whether or not science is based on experimentation, where number 11 and number 1 are asking the same thing. And obviously, if science is testable, we can do experiments, so it is based on experimentation. So science is based on experimentation or experiments. Number 12 is asking, can science solve all problems? Well, science can only solve things that are observable, meaning things that we can use our 5 senses for. So if it's outside of our 5 senses, obviously science can't be used to address that problem. So for instance, science can't be used to address whether or not a God exists. And the reason why we can't do that is because that is not an observable thing. We can't do experimentation on it. So science cannot solve all problems. For number 13, science is or science is not based on faith. Well, this goes back to number 12. Faith means lacking evidence. It means to believe in something when you don't have evidence to support it. So obviously, this is going to be outside the realm of science because as scientists, we know that we have to use things that are observable using our 5 senses. So this is going to be an NS. 14, is science limited to the natural world? Well, the natural world is the opposite of based on faith. So because these are opposites to one another, we know that science is limited to the natural world, things that can be observed. Number 15, our last one, is asking whether or not science is based on belief. Science being based on belief is the same thing as science being based on faith. So 13 and 15 mean the same thing. And if 13 is saying that science is not based on faith, obviously science is not based on belief. If you need any additional extra help, you can always go back to daysheet number 2, or you can go to Biomonster Cinema, scroll all the way down to the second to last video, and there's a video that addresses what science is and what science is not that goes into much more detail. All right, thanks guys, and good luck studying.